Hello, in this video we'll be taking a look on how to create a question asking application for conferences. We will call it Ask Me, and it looks as it follows. So this is the front end that we already have. We will be creating the backend of the application using Booster framework. So the application looks like this. We have a backend URL field here, some conference, and name or alias. The backend URL is just to let us insert our backend URL after we create it with Booster. So I can come in and here I can ask questions, I can like them, and of course I can share this with other people. So let's take a look at how would making this application looks like. So we will begin by opening up a console and we will create a new Boost application. So to do that, we're going to do a Boost new project and we're going to call it Ask Me. Here it will ask some generic questions that you can fill or not. It will leave the default values that you see over there. And in the last step, you will have to check to choose which cloud provider you're going to be deploying to by default. We're going to be using AWS, but you can put more providers after the project has been created, so don't worry about that. There's no magic underneath, it's just a library. So now it will perform an npm install, which everyone knows that takes a while, so let's wait for a little bit. Okay, so the project has been generated already, so we can sit into it. And we can open Visual Studio Code with it. Okay, so we can see that we got already a TypeScript project pre-configured for us with linter, like prettier, mocha, and we already have some folders for us, so we don't have to think about architecture build. If we now open up the config file, this is the only configuration that you have to do, the app name and the provider that you're going to be using. Booster's not smart yet to figure out that before you, but well, we're trying our best. So let's start with some use case. We will probably need to have a conference to be able to ask questions there. So we're going to create a command called CreateConference. So let's do this with Boost new command. It's going to be called CreateConference, and it's going to have some fields as well. It's going to have some name of the conference and the location of the conference. It's going to be both strings. So after we do this, Booster creates a single file for us. There's no other Git changes, called CreateConference. And here we just have to fill in the blanks. So in order to authorize users, we're going to specify all, so everyone can create a conference. You shouldn't probably do this, but just for make this tutorial simpler. And here we have to register the event when this command handler gets triggered. So in order to do that, we have first to create our event, which of course is ConferenceCreated. I'm going to create a new event called ConferenceCreated. And it's going to have some fields. It's going to have a conference ID. It's going to be a UID. And we're going to have some location, which is a string. Again, this creates another file called ConferenceCreated, and we can fill in the blanks. I got my ID configured for auto formatting, so when I save, it formats it for me. And we have to fill here the entity ID. This is a special method that Booster uses to partition your entities and ensure that every data is correct in cases where there is a high throughput for your application. So I'm going to just return this .conference ID. So now that we have the conference created event, we can come back here and just register it. Again, no fancy stuff. We just do a conference created. And we're going to pass here command.name and command.location. I'm cheating a little bit here because I'm using the name of the conference as the ID. And yeah, that's a UID, but both are strings. So I'm just doing this to go faster. So let's create now what's a conference, which is an entity. So we can go ahead and create a conference. So a conference as well is going to have some fields. It's going to have an ID, and which is a UID, and a location, which is a string. And it gets created from reducing the ConferenceCreated event. So I'm gonna do this in order to generate it as well. You can see that now I have two duplicate ID identifiers, and this is because all entities have an ID by default. So we can just take and remove it from here. I can do this because it's just code. Booster is not generating any kind of special configuration underneath, not changing anything. This code that's being generated actually can be written by hand, and it will work as well. So here we have to reduce this event. This is the same as an array.reduce method. We got the event, which is the current thing, and like the event that's coming, and the current conference, which is what we currently have. It is nullable because when you deploy your application, there's no conference. So you have to take into account that there might not be any conference before if you're going to use it. In our case, we're going to be creating the conference, so we can just delete this parameter as we're not using it, and we can create a new conference here. So I'm going to do event.conferenceID, event.location, and that's it. So now we got already the command, the entity, and the event. Now we have to go and create the conference read model. The conference read model will probably need to also have like a possibility of filtering, of transforming the conference, because that's what read models are for hiding fields, adding fields, do whatever you want. In our case, I'm going to be creating a new read model for the conference. I'm going to call it conference read model. It's going to have some ID, some location, and this is going to be projecting the conference entity by the ID field. This means that each time that a conference with the same ID as the read model changes, the projection function of the read model is going to be executed. So let's run this, and we will have a new read model created for us. Again, this is the public API, so we can specify who will access this. And here also all read models have an ID, so we can just delete this part. Now this projection function is very similar to a reducer. We're getting the new change of the entity and the current read model that we have, and we're not going to be using it, so we're just going to be returning a new conference read model. And I'm going to be adding here a new entity ID and the entity location. So now we have everything ready for deploying our application. We get a command that creates an event, that event gets reduced into an entity, and then that entity gets projected into a read model to be exposed through a GraphQL API. So let's go ahead and do our first deploy. So we're going to be deploying the production environment. Remember that the configure call of the booster configuration has the environment string over here, so we have to match it. So we are essentially deploying it to production. Now this is the first deploy, and it's gonna be taking a while, because now it's gonna be creating all the required stuff in AWS, including the CloudFormation change set. It's going to be creating the CloudFormation stack itself, DynamoDB for events, DynamoDB for read models, also the IAM roles. It's going to be creating everything for you. You will see it now in the console. So the first deploy takes a while, but after that, the deploys are incremental. So we will be able to do it much faster. Okay, a bunch of stuff has happened already, and you can see that in the end, Booster gives you some URLs. This one essentially is the one that you will need for executing GraphQL stuff for your app, but as well you can have the WebSocket URL here in order to subscribe in real time, also using GraphQL. So let's open up a GraphQL client. I'm using Altair here, but you can use whatever you want. So I'll be adding this endpoint, and in theory I should be able to, yeah, we got our conference read model already seen here, and if we check the mutations, we got the CreateConference as well. So let's go here and let's create a new conference. So I'm gonna be creating a new conference called BoosterConf, and for the location I'm going to be using Canary Islands, for example. So let's run it. So now we got here a CreateConference true, which means, hey, we received your command and we are working on it. In order to check if it has been successful or not, we can come to the query part and check all the read models. So I'm just gonna remove this querying part over here, so I get all of the read models, and I can see that inside of the conference read models array, there's one conference called BoosterConf in the Canary Islands, which is the one that I just created. So let's go ahead and let's add more stuff. For example, one thing that we haven't done yet is that a conference should have questions. So of course I could use the code generator of Booster and regenerate the files, but that's not what I need, because right now I just need to add more stuff to my code and I don't want to overwrite what I already have. So we can go ahead and here add like what we need, which will be a questions array. But yeah, we don't have a question itself, so that should be probably one entity of the business domain that we're modeling here. So I'm gonna go ahead and create it for me. So I'm gonna create a new entity called question, and this is gonna have some fields. It's gonna have at least the ID, but because this is an entity, I don't need that. I'm gonna have an asked on to know when this question has been asked, for example. And the conference ID that this question is related to. Also, I'm going to be having a questioner, like who has asked the question, the string, the text itself of the question, the likes that this question has, and when it has been created. So let's run this. Okay, we can see that we got here already this created for us, and we can just import this from question. And now here, when the conference is created, the questions array is going to be empty. Yeah, and this should be read only, so it works properly. Okay, nice. In the same, we should be able to do the same in the front end. So we have to add this as well as an array of questions. So in the read model. That have auto completion work, and I'm going to be returning the entity.questions here. So now we can go ahead. We don't have anything here. We can just recreate the conference for us. Oh no, wait, we have to deploy it. So let's do the same thing. It's gonna take a while, but we can handle it. But of course, this is gonna be much shorter than the previous deploy, because now it's just incremental. It's not deploying the whole stack. It's just changing stuff on the cloud, which, by the way, you would have to do by hand if not. There we go. It has been deployed already. So we can go ahead and create the conference again. So as an input, I'm going to be using this. So I can paste it here. Just got to remove the quotes because GraphQL doesn't require quotes. And yeah, it's not name, it's not ID, it's name instead. Here we go. That's another great thing from GraphQL, which is you have client-side validation for free. So we can run the mutation, and it should say true because it has recreated the conference. And if we query now that stuff, we're going to be doing again the same thing, querying for everything. We run the query, and we got the read model here, which, by the way, is weird, but it makes sense because it hasn't been updated like directly. So the entity has not been updated yet with different values, and we are not updating the read model yet, but that's okay. So now let's just keep moving, and let's jump to the question creation and question liking part, which is important. So let's go ahead and create a new command. So we're going to have an ask command. I'm going to have some fields as well for it. I'm going to say who is the one that asking the question itself, and the conference that this is related to. Also, when a question has been asked, that's the event, question asked. So we gotta also write the event for this. And we're gonna have some fields as well here, and we're gonna have like a question ID. It's gonna be a UID. When the question has been asked, it's gonna be a string. I'm using strings because in Booster, like the convention is to use ISO strings for datetime, because it's much easier to make them like more cloud agnostic without having to constantly create the object, deserialize depending on the format. In the questionnaire, there's going to be a string as well, and the conference is going to be UID, and the text of the string. So we got this, and we got already the question entity as well. But we need also to be able to have the read model, but well, we'll take a look at it later. So if we come to ask, we can specify who is able to execute this, and we're going to be registering a new event called question asked. So here we're going to be passing command dot question ID, but instead, because I don't have a UID coming from the command, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate it. So I'm going to do UID.generate to have the question ID generated. When it's going to be new date to ISO string. The questioner is going to be command.who. Conference ID, this is going to be command.conference, and the text is going to be command.question. So there we go. Also, now we have this created, we can come to the question ask event, return the appropriate question ID, so question ID here. And when we come here to the question entity, we can go ahead and write a reducer. I'm just gonna copy and paste this one because reducers have mostly the same shape. But in this case, I'm gonna be reducing the question asked event. And I'm just gonna go ahead and do search and replace. It's not gonna return a conference, but rather a question. And here we can just return a new question, and we'll be returning everything from here. And we don't have any likes at the beginning, so I'm going to return 0 and create that. Oh, well, I duplicated this. Well, let's just return 1 over here. So, and reduces should be also imported from Booster. There we go. So we got our question here. And now we have to be able to expose it. Of course, we have added this to the questions array in the conference read model, but this is not good in terms of efficiency, because entities are partitioned, which means that in high throughput they can absorb data concurrently. But if you have just one entity absorbing everything, like if, for example, we got like thousands of people asking like a lot of questions in the same second, everything is going to go to the same entity, and that's not good in terms of not only performance, but as well in costs in your cloud provider. So when you have like an array of entities in a read model or in an entity, or including like having a single read model that has a lot of stuff, that's generally an anti-pattern in Booster. So what you want to do is, instead of having the questions in the single entity, you want to create like more entities and have a separate read model for each one of them. So we can go ahead and fix them. This is actually why I wasn't giving so much importance to the thing that happened before, because we don't really need that. And you know what? I'm just gonna like actually leave this as an empty array so it doesn't deploy anything else. So we can go ahead and create a Boost new read model, and it's gonna be called question read model. And yeah, I'm gonna have some fields. It's gonna have an ID and asked on first ID, UID, questioner, string, text, string, likes, which is a number, and created at, which is a string. Which, by the way, I have to replicate because the front end already expects this when I created it. So yeah, yeah, it's duplicated. We have asked on and created that, but well, and this is going to be projecting the question entity by the ID field. And again, making the same mistake, adding an ID here. So we can generate this, specify who is authorized to run this, and we can just go ahead and remove what we don't need. So this is not needed anymore, and we can return a new question read model. And again, just fill with the stuff that you need from here. First ID, questioner, and that should be it. Yep, format it, and there we go. And now actually we can go ahead and implement directly the likes functionality. So again, like is one use case, so we can use it directly as a command. So let's go ahead and do a Boost new command, like. And it's gonna have some fields as well. We're gonna pass to it the question ID that we will be liking, which is a UID, and by whom, which is who's asking this, who is liking the question. So with this generated, we can go ahead and create the new event. Again, it's gonna be a UID, by whom, gonna be a string. And we don't need to create any entity or any read model because this is affecting the question. So we can come here to like, specify that everyone can like questions. And here we'll be registering a new question liked event with command.question_id and command.byWhom. When we come to the event question liked, we will be returning this .question_id. And when we come to the entity, we have to create another reducer, which again, just gonna copy paste. And I'm gonna search and replace here question liked. And I'm gonna import it. And in this case, we will be doing some interesting stuff. So for example, here we have to like an existing question. So we will be depending on that. So we're going to create again the parameter here. And we will validate that this question exists or not. So we're going to say if not current question, we're going to throw a new error here. Question with ID and question ID doesn't exist. That's gonna throw. So for now on, TypeScript considers that the question does exist, so we can just operate on it as it was like a regular existing object. And we're gonna do a spread real quick over here, and we're gonna say likes equals current question dot likes plus 1. So that's gonna be, oh yeah, if I manage to, okay, for some reason, there we go. So yeah, now we got the like functionality, and this should be updating the question, and everything should be staying the same. So we can go ahead and do a deploy to production. And this should be our last deploy, and it should be working. Okay, so the deploy has finished. Now we can come back to the GraphQL client to see if everything was working. Go here, let's update the docs. So we got the question read models over here as well, limitations, we got ask, we got like. And just to make sure, let's create a conference to start from a clean and make direct test in the front end. So name, I'm gonna call it final test, for example, and location is gonna be the internet. Let's run the mutation. It's gonna be saying CreateConference true. Now let me copy the backend and come back here. Gonna be coming back to ask me, but here I'm just gonna change this. See that now I got my 2 conferences created here. So I'm gonna come to final test. And let's hope that this works. So let's enter, let's create a question. Is this working? And let's ask it. And yes, it is. Let's like it. And yes, it does work. So I hope you like this little guide on how to create an asking question application in Booster. Have a really good day, and thanks for watching.